My children called me crazy, forgetful, a danger to myself. For months, they moved my keys, hid my purse, and whispered behind my back, all in an attempt to steal my inheritance. What they didn't know was that they weren't just gaslighting me, they were poisoning me. And a routine trip to the dentist was about to expose their entire twisted and heartbreaking plan. I want to start by giving a special shout out to my wonderful and loyal subscribers who are always with me in the comments. Today's shout out goes to Cynthia from Philadelphia, Diane from North Carolina, and also to Robert, Gloria, and Kevin. Your support means the world to me. Thank you for being here with me. Those who are watching us recently, please do not forget to write where you are watching us from. We will definitely say hello to you. But before the madness began, before the quiet cruelty and the creeping doubt, there was just the quiet, ordinary grief. My husband of 40 years, Arthur, was gone. He had passed peacefully in his sleep, a quiet end for a quiet man. Our small, tidy house in a respectable Detroit neighborhood suddenly felt cavernous and silent. The air, which for decades had carried the faint, comforting scent of his turpentine and linseed oil, now smelled of nothing but loss. We had lived a simple life. Not poor, but comfortably modest. Arthur was an art restorer, a man with a deep, almost spiritual passion for bringing faded masterpieces back to life. His studio, a dusty, chaotic space in a run-down industrial building, was his sanctuary. I rarely went there. It was his world, and I was content with mine, our home, our garden, and our 2 children, Michael and Jessica. In the days after his passing, my children were my rock. Michael, a 40-year-old contractor with his father's steady hands, handled all the arrangements. Jessica, a 35-year-old paralegal with a sharp mind, dealt with the mountain of paperwork. They were good children, or so I believed. We grieved together, huddled in the living room, sharing memories of the quiet, gentle man who had been the center of our world. We were a family united in sorrow, finding strength in each other. Looking back now, I can see that the moment they heard of his death, they weren't grieving a father, they were waiting for an opportunity. The day we went to the lawyer's office for the reading of the will, we expected no surprises. Arthur and I had drawn up simple wills years ago. The house would go to me. A few sentimental items like his father's watch and my grandmother's ring would be earmarked for the kids. His small savings and pension would be enough for me to live on, carefully. It was all very straightforward. We sat in the stuffy, leather and mahogany office of Mr. Davies, our family lawyer for years. He gave us his condolences, his voice a low, professional murmur, and then he began to read. As expected, the house, the car, and the personal bank accounts were all left to me, his beloved wife. Then he got to the final item. And regarding my studio and its contents, he read, clearing his throat, to my beloved wife, Gabriella, I leave my life's true work, my private collection. I frowned in confusion. Michael and Jessica exchanged a similar look. His collection? Arthur didn't collect things. He fixed them for other people. I pictured the dusty, cluttered studio and imagined a few canvases he'd been fond of. Maybe some antique frames he'd picked up at a flea market. Mr. Davies paused, looking at us over the rim of his glasses. He seemed to sense our confusion. Arthur was a very private man, Gabriella, he said gently, and a very, very shrewd one. He reached into a thick file folder on his desk and pulled out a bound document. He slid it across the polished table toward me. He had his collection professionally appraised just last month. This is the official valuation for the estate. I picked up the document, my hands slightly trembling. I opened it to the final page. to the summary. My eyes scanned the jargon: market value, provenance, estimated auction price. And then I saw the number at the bottom of the page, the final assessed value of the contents of my husband's dusty, run-down studio. I read the number once, then twice, certain that my grief-addled mind was playing tricks on me. It was a number so vast, so impossible, so completely disconnected from the 40 years of our modest life that it felt like a misprint. $20 million. The room was silent, but in my ears there was a rushing sound like the sea. 20 million. Arthur, my quiet, frugal Arthur, who drove a 10-year-old car and mended his own sweaters, had been a secret millionaire. He had sacrificed our family's comfort, our financial ease, for his secret passion. The shock was a physical blow, leaving me breathless. I slowly lifted my eyes from the page and looked at my children. I expected to see the same stunned, bewildered expression on their faces, and I did for a moment, but then, as the reality of the number began to sink in, I saw something else flicker to life behind their eyes. It was a look of pure, unadulterated avarice, a hungry, calculating light that I had never seen before. In that moment, the lawyer's office was silent, but I could feel the world shifting violently beneath my feet. I was looking at a number that represented my husband's secret life. I didn't know it yet, but my children were looking at the number that would make them try to end mine. The car ride home from the lawyer's office was the quietest I had ever shared with my children. The air in my sensible 10-year-old sedan was thick with a new and unfamiliar energy. I was trying to wrap my mind around the fact that the man I had shared a bed with for 40 years was a complete stranger to me. A man who had chosen a secret life of art over a life of comfort with his own family. My thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, hurt, and a strange blossoming wonder. But the silence from Michael and Jessica was different. It was not the silence of shock or grief. It was the crackling, electric silence of a storm gathering just over the horizon. Their grief for their father had been instantly and completely eclipsed by the sheer gravitational pull of $20 million. Back at the house, the dam of their excitement broke. "Mom, this changes everything," Michael said, pacing back and forth across my worn living room carpet. He was practically vibrating with energy. 20 million? Can you even comprehend that? You never have to worry about a bill again. We never have to worry. My business. I can finally expand. Jesse, you can quit that job you hate. Jessica, ever the pragmatist, was already on her phone, her thumbs flying. I'm looking at auction houses. Sotheby's, Christie's. We can't just sell these to a local dealer. This needs to be a major international event. We'll need a new financial advisor, set up a family trust. Mom, your life is completely different now. We'll all be set. Forever. They spoke in we and our. Their plan's a runaway train, and I was just a passenger they assumed was along for the ride. They were carving up my husband's legacy before his body was even cold in the ground. No, I said, my voice quiet but firm in the sudden silence. They both stopped and stared at me. No, Michael repeated, a look of bafflement on his face. What do you mean, no? I'm not selling the collection, I said, the words feeling truer and more solid the moment they left my lips. This wasn't an investment to your father. This was his passion. It was his whole secret life. He sacrificed everything for these paintings. To sell them off to the highest bidder, it would be a betrayal of his memory. I have to honor him. I have to keep it together. Jessica let out a short, sharp, disbelieving laugh. Honor him? Mom, he lied to us for 40 years. He let us live this pinched, careful life while he was sitting on a dragon's hoard of treasure. He honored these paintings more than he honored us. The least he can do is provide for his family in death in a way he never did in life. This isn't about being realistic, it's about being respectful, I countered, my voice rising. This was his soul. No, Mom, his soul is with the Lord, Michael said, his voice taking on a condescending, placating tone that set my teeth on edge. These are just things, just canvas and paint. Things that can give your grandchildren, his grandchildren, a future he never gave us. Don't be selfish. Selfish. The word was a slap. After 40 years of pinching pennies, of mending clothes, of worrying about the mortgage on this tiny house, my desire to honor my husband's one true passion was selfish. I saw then that we were not having a conversation. Their minds were made up. I was just an obstacle. The next day, I needed to understand. I needed to see what he had loved more than us. I drove to the industrial park, to the grimy brick building that housed his studio. I unlocked the door, the air inside still and thick with the scent of him. Turpentine, coffee, and old paper. The main room was just as I remembered it, a chaotic mess of half-finished restorations, tools, and empty frames. But on the back wall, hidden behind a heavy canvas curtain, was a steel door with a keypad lock I'd never seen before. Mr. Davies had given me the code. I punched in the numbers, and the heavy door swung open with a soft hiss. The air that flowed out was cool and dry. I stepped inside, into a different world. It was a large, climate-controlled vault with professional gallery lighting and racks upon racks of carefully stored paintings. It was breathtaking. I was surrounded by a secret museum of masterpieces. I saw names I recognized from art history books, works by Charles White, Elizabeth Catlett, Jacob Lawrence. There were stunning, vibrant paintings by artists I had never heard of, a hidden treasure trove of 20th century African American art. He hadn't just been collecting, he had been preserving our history, our culture. I walked through the silent room, running my hand over a heavy, gilded frame. I finally understood. This wasn't a hoard, it was a sanctuary. This was my husband's soul, and it was beautiful. My resolve to protect it hardened into something unbreakable. A few days later, my children came over for dinner. Their mood was tense, their smiles brittle. After the meal, Jessica followed me into the kitchen as I was clearing the plates. "Are you feeling all right, Mom?" she asked, her voice syrupy with false concern. "You seem a little forgetful lately." "I called yesterday afternoon and you had left the gas stove on. The burner was just hissing away." "It's a good thing I called to remind you." A cold chill went down my spine. I hadn't used the stove all day yesterday. I had eaten a sandwich for lunch and leftovers for dinner. I am meticulous, almost obsessive about checking the stove. I would never have left it on. "No, I didn't, honey," I said, my voice firm. "The stove was off." Jessica just sighed, a theatrical, pitying sound. She turned and gave Michael, who was standing in the doorway, a look of profound, shared concern. "See?" she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "This is what I was talking about. She's not remembering things clearly." I think the shock of it all is really getting to her. They left soon after, kissing me on the cheek, their touch feeling cold and reptilian. I stood alone in my kitchen, the scent of their false sympathy hanging in the air like poison. I knew she was lying about the stove. It was a simple, easily disproven lie. But the way they had looked at each other, the way they had already begun to build a narrative of my incompetence, it was the first deliberate move in a cruel and terrifying game I didn't even know I was playing. The lie about the gas stove hung in the air between us long after they were gone. I knew with an unshakable certainty that Jessica had invented it. But the purpose of the lie was what truly chilled me. It wasn't just a petty falsehood. It was a carefully placed foundation stone for a narrative they were beginning to build. The narrative of my incompetence. I became more watchful, more wary. The loving, easy relationship I thought I had with my children was over, replaced by a tense, silent chess match where I didn't even know all the rules. The gaslighting began in earnest the following week. It was a campaign of 1,000 tiny, maddening cuts, each one designed to make me doubt the evidence of my own senses. My car keys, which I have placed on the small hook by the door every single day for 20 years, were suddenly not there. After 15 minutes of frantic searching, Michael, who had stopped by just to check on me, would find them in the butter dish in the refrigerator. "Oh, Mom," he'd say with a sad, gentle shake of his head, "you're just so scattered right now. The grief is really doing a number on you." My reading glasses would vanish from my nightstand and reappear a day later in the birdbath in the garden discovered by Jessica. "You must have brought them outside with your coffee and forgot," she'd say, her voice dripping with pity. Each time I had a clear, vivid memory of placing the object in its correct spot. But their constant, unified front of gentle, loving concern was a powerful acid, slowly eating away at the edges of my certainty. Then, the campaign escalated. I had a dentist appointment, one I had been waiting 6 weeks for. I had written it in big red letters on the kitchen calendar. Tuesday, 2 p.m., Dr. Evans. On Tuesday morning, I looked at the calendar and the square was blank, completely empty. An hour later, Jessica called. "Mom, the receptionist from Dr. Evans' office just called me," she said, her voice laced with anxiety. "You missed your appointment. They had to call me because I'm your emergency contact. Are you okay?" "Did you forget?" "No," I said, my voice trembling as I stared at the blank square. "No, I had it written down. It's gone." "Oh, honey," she sighed, a sound of deep theatrical sadness. "Maybe you just thought you wrote it down. It's okay. We'll rebook it. But you really have me worried." They were not just moving things anymore. They were erasing my reality. The most insidious part was how they cloaked their cruelty in the language of love and care. Michael started bringing me a special blend of chamomile tea. "One of the guys I work with, his wife is an herbalist," he said, placing a beautifully labeled tin on my counter. "She says this is great for stress and for improving memory." "I told her you've been struggling." Jessica started bringing over entire meals, delicious casseroles and stews stored in Tupperware containers. "You shouldn't have to worry about cooking right now, Mom," she insisted, filling my refrigerator. "Let us take care of you." I didn't know it then, but their love was the delivery system for their poison. I drank the calming tea in the evenings, and I ate the lovingly prepared meals, and I began to feel worse. A persistent, heavy fog settled over my mind. I'd walk into a room and completely forget why I was there. I'd lose my train of thought, mid-sentence. The world began to feel blurry, the edges soft and uncertain. The psychotropic drugs they were secretly feeding me were working, creating the very symptoms they could then point to as evidence of my decline. My real, drug-induced memory lapses made their gaslighting all the more effective. I was trapped in a confusing, terrifying hell. One moment, I would be filled with a cold, lucid certainty that my children were trying to destroy me. The next, after genuinely forgetting a neighbor's name or where I had parked my car at the grocery store, I would be plunged into a dark sea of doubt. Was it possible? Could grief and shock truly unravel a person's mind so completely? I began to feel afraid of my own shadow, of the quiet, empty house that had once been my sanctuary. I started keeping a small secret journal, writing down the day's events, a desperate attempt to hold on to a reality that felt like it was slipping through my fingers like sand. My little journal became my only confidant. Its lined pages the only place I could be sure of the truth. I wrote everything down, my entries a desperate catalog of a mind under siege. April 12th. My keys were in the garden. Michael said I must have dropped them while weeding. I didn't go in the garden today. I know I didn't. April 15th. Jessica says I missed a lunch date with my friend Carol. Carol called me, worried. The date was never in my calendar. I know I would have written it down. Each entry was a small anchor to my sanity, a testament against the rising tide of their concerned, gentle lies. But the fog in my mind was getting thicker. The tea Michael brought me and the meals Jessica delivered were a constant low dose of poison to my system. My thoughts grew sluggish, my focus frayed. I would find myself standing in the middle of the living room, my heart pounding, with no memory of what I was supposed to be doing. And in those moments of genuine drug-induced confusion, their whispers would find fertile ground. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am losing my mind. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in May. It came in the form of a dead orchid. It had been Arthur's last gift to me before he passed, a magnificent white phalaenopsis with blooms so perfect they looked like porcelain. I had nurtured it for almost a year, and its health was a quiet, living memorial to my husband. I watered it once a week, just as the florist had instructed. It was my ritual. That morning, I woke up and walked into the sunroom, and my heart stopped. The orchid was dead, not just wilted, but utterly and completely lifeless. Its beautiful white petals were brown and limp, the leaves a sickly yellowed mush. The soil was soaked, a swamp of dark, waterlogged moss. I let out a cry of pure animal grief. It was as if Arthur had died all over again. I knew. I had watered it 4 days ago, on my designated Friday schedule. I fumbled for the phone and called Jessica, my voice choked with sobs. My orchid, Jessie, it's dead. I don't understand what happened. Her voice on the other end of the line was a masterpiece of loving, heartbroken concern. Oh, Mama. Oh, honey, no, she said, her tone dripping with pity. Sweetheart, you watered it yesterday when I was there. You poured a whole pitcher of water on it. I thought it was a bit much, but I didn't want to upset you by saying anything. She paused, as if gathering the strength to deliver another blow. And Michael told me you did the same thing the day before when he stopped by. Mom, I think you've been watering it every day without even realizing. Oh, Mama, I think you loved it to death. I sank to the floor, the phone slipping from my hand. I tried to grasp the memory of the past 2 days to find a solid piece of evidence to refute her claim, but all I found was a gray, featureless fog. I had a vague memory of Jessica bringing a casserole, of Michael bringing tea, but the details were gone, erased by the drugs. For the first time, I had no firm memory to contradict her convincing, compassionate-sounding lie. And in that moment, the foundation of my sanity shattered. What if she was right? What if I had killed the last beautiful thing my husband had given me, drowned it in my own forgetfulness? From that day on, I surrendered. The fight went out of me. I believed them. I believed that my mind was broken, that I was a danger to myself and everything I loved. I stopped going out. I barely ate. I just sat in my quiet house, adrift in a sea of confusion and fear, while my children took over my life. They started managing my mail, paying my bills, answering my phone. They spoke in low, concerned voices about options and getting me the best care. They were preparing to have me declared incompetent. the final move in their long, cruel game. And I was too broken to stop them. The only thing that pierced through the fog was a sudden stabbing pain in my back molar. A relentless, sharp, throbbing agony that was so intensely real, so undeniably present, that it became a strange kind of anchor. It was a pain that could not be gaslit. I couldn't ignore it. I had to see a dentist. I found the appointment card Jessica had rebooked for me, stuck to the refrigerator with a cheerful little magnet. I looked at it for a long time, the thought of leaving the house, of navigating the real world, filling me with a profound, paralyzing terror. But the pain in my tooth was stronger than the fear in my mind. Jessica was thrilled to help, of course. She made the call to confirm, her voice full of pride at my brave step. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mom," she said, patting my hand as she hung up the phone. "I'll drive you. We'll get through this together." I nodded, leaning on her for support, a frail, confused old woman putting her trust in her loving, devoted daughter. A trip to the dentist felt like a journey to the edge of the world. I had no idea it was actually the first step toward my salvation. The morning of the dental appointment was a gray, drizzly day, a perfect reflection of the fog in my mind. The throbbing in my jaw was a vicious, pulsing beat, the only clear and distinct feeling I had left. I was terrified, not of the dentist, but of the journey itself. The simple act of leaving my house felt like a monumental undertaking, a treacherous voyage for which my broken mind was ill-equipped. Jessica was a pillar of doting, daughterly support. She helped me get dressed, her hands gentle on my arms as she guided me into my coat. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mom," she cooed, her voice a soft, soothing balm that I now know was laced with poison. "I'll be right there with you the whole time. You're so brave for doing this." She was praising me for a simple act of self-care as if I were a toddler taking my first steps, and in my diminished state, I was grateful for it. The dentist's office was a modern, sterile world of white walls and quiet efficiency. It was the last place on earth I would have expected to find my salvation. Jessica did all the talking at the front desk, filling out my paperwork, her pen scratching across the page as she updated my medical history. She spoke to the receptionist in a low, concerned whisper, just loud enough for me to hear snippets. A very difficult time since my father passed. Significant memory issues. Very anxious. She was painting the picture, reinforcing the narrative, building my cage even here. Dr. Evans was a kind, middle-aged man with a reassuring smile. After examining my tooth, he confirmed what I already knew. It was a severe abscess, and the tooth needed to be extracted. "Now, Gabriella," he said gently, "this is a fairly intensive procedure. Given your anxiety, which your daughter mentioned, I would strongly recommend we use IV sedation. You'll just drift off to a comfortable sleep and wake up when it's all over. No stress, no pain." I just nodded, a passive, grateful patient. The idea of sleeping through it all was a profound relief. "Excellent," he said. "Now, it is our standard safety protocol, especially for a new patient of your age, to run a quick pre-procedure blood panel. We just want to check your kidney function and a few other markers to make sure the sedation is perfectly safe for you. The phlebotomist will just be a moment." I saw a flicker of something in Jessica's eyes, a brief, sharp flash of panic. "Oh, is that really necessary, doctor?" she asked, her voice a little too bright. "She's so frail and she hates needles. We wouldn't want to cause any more stress." Dr. Evans' smile remained, but it became a little firmer. "It's a non-negotiable safety measure, I'm afraid," he said politely. "Patient safety is our absolute first priority. It will only take a second." A nurse came in and gently took my blood. I barely felt the needle. I was so lost in the fog, so consumed by the pain in my jaw and the fear of the procedure, that the small routine act barely registered. It was just another thing that was happening to me, another part of a day I simply had to endure. While we waited for the lab results, the dental assistant began the preliminary steps, taking x-rays and preparing the surgical area. I sat in the chair, pliant and docile, a lamb awaiting slaughter, while my daughter, my shepherd, sat in the waiting room, her mask of loving concern hiding a heart of pure, cold avarice. After about 20 minutes, Dr. Evans' desk phone buzzed. He answered it, listened for a moment, and I saw his friendly, professional demeanor vanish. His brow furrowed, and he turned his back to me, his voice dropping to a low, serious murmur. He hung up the phone and stood there for a long moment, staring at the wall. When he turned back to me, his face was a mask of grave concern. "Gabriella," he said, his voice now stripped of its earlier warmth, "we're going to have to stop. There is an anomaly in your blood work. We've found something that shouldn't be there." He excused himself and came back a moment later with Jessica, whose face was a carefully constructed mask of worried confusion. "Doctor." Evans looked directly at my daughter. "Jessica, your mother's toxicology screen came back with significant levels of olanzapine and several benzodiazepine derivatives. These are powerful antipsychotic and sedative medications. Can you tell me which doctor is managing her prescriptions for these?" Jessica was a brilliant liar, but she was caught completely off guard. She stammered, her eyes darting between the doctor and me. "Oh, her psychiatrist, Dr. Miller. She's been having a very hard time since my father's death. The doctor felt it was necessary." She was inventing a name, a story, scrambling to patch a hole that was rapidly becoming a gaping tear in her web of lies. "Doctor." Evans looked from Jessica's panicked face to my own foggy, bewildered expression. He was a medical professional, and he knew something was deeply, terribly wrong. "I see," he said, his voice taking on a new, unyielding authority. "Well, given the presence of these unscheduled substances in her system, it would be medically and ethically impossible to proceed with sedation. In fact, I am not comfortable with your mother going home at all until she has been properly evaluated." He looked at Jessica, his gaze now one of cold professional duty. "I am a mandated reporter. I am legally required to report this. I am calling an ambulance to take your mother to the hospital for a full workup." The world dissolved into a surreal, chaotic blur. Jessica's face, a mask of panicked rage, was the last thing I saw clearly before the paramedics guided me onto a gurney. She was arguing, her voice high and shrill, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that I was just a confused old woman. But Dr. Evans, my accidental savior, stood his ground like a stone wall, and the doors of the ambulance closed, shutting out my daughter's desperate lies. The ride to the hospital was a disorienting journey through a city I barely recognized, the wail of the siren a fitting soundtrack for the shrieking confusion in my own mind. In the emergency room, I became a specimen, a puzzle to be solved. A team of doctors and nurses moved around me with a quiet, urgent efficiency, drawing more blood, asking questions I couldn't answer, and wheeling me into the cold, humming tube of a CT scanner. I was too lost in the drug-induced fog to be properly scared. I simply submitted, a passive object in my own unfolding drama. Michael and Jessica arrived soon after, their faces perfectly composed masks of loving concern. They tried to take control of the situation immediately, speaking to the doctors in low, confidential tones. I could hear them through the curtain of my cubicle, spinning their web of lies. Gain a complete psychological break after our father's death, and we've been so worried. Or her psychiatrist, Dr. Miller, has her on a new regimen. They were so convincing, so plausible. but their story had one fatal flaw. Doctor Evans had already reported it as a potential case of elder abuse, a possible malicious drugging, and that report had triggered a protocol they had not anticipated. It had summoned a hospital social worker. Her name was Ms. Davis, a sharp, empathetic woman in her 50s with eyes that seemed to see right through the fog in my mind and into the truth beneath. Her first act was to politely but firmly escort Michael and Jessica to the waiting room. "I need to speak with my patient alone," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. For the first time in weeks, I was alone, truly alone, without the suffocating presence of my children's care. In the quiet, sterile sanctuary of that hospital room, away from the drugged tea and the poisoned casseroles, the thick, heavy fog in my mind began to ever so slightly recede. Ms. Davis sat down beside me. She didn't treat me like a child or an invalid. She spoke to me as an equal. "Gabriella," she said, her voice calm and kind. "The doctors found some very powerful medication in your system, medicine that wasn't prescribed to you. Can you tell me how you've been feeling lately?" I started to speak, the words coming slowly at first, as if I were retrieving them from a great distance. I told her about the confusion, the memory lapses, the feeling of living in a dream. "My children, they've been so good to me," I said, the conditioned response still there. "My son brings me a special calming tea every night. My daughter, she cooks all my meals." As I said the words out loud to this calm, neutral observer, the pieces of the puzzle began to click into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. The tea, the food, the forgetfulness that had begun right after, the lies about the stove, the keys, the appointments. It wasn't my mind that was broken. It was my children. A sudden, lucid memory pierced through the fog. "My journal," I said, my voice suddenly sharp, grasping onto the thought like a lifeline. "I kept a journal. It's in my purse. I wrote everything down because I thought I was going crazy." Ms. Davis retrieved my purse from the hospital's patient property locker. Together, we opened the small leather-bound book. She read my desperate, confused entries aloud, her voice steady and clear. As she read, my own words became the evidence that exonerated me. The timeline was undeniable. The gaslighting, the cruelty, all of it, laid bare in my own shaky handwriting. When she finished, she looked at the toxicology report, then back at the journal, and the full monstrous picture was complete. She closed the journal and placed a gentle hand on mine. Her eyes were full of a deep, professional anger. "Gabriella," she said, her voice soft but fierce, "you are not going crazy. You are not forgetful. You are the victim of a systematic and cruel crime. Your children have been poisoning you." The truth, when it finally arrived, was not a gentle dawning. It was a brutal physical blow, a sob, a raw, ragged sound of 40 years of a mother's love being shattered, tore from my throat. The tears that streamed down my face were not tears of confusion anymore. They were tears of a terrible, heartbreaking clarity. Ms. Davis let me cry for a moment, then her expression hardened into one of pure, steely resolve. She picked up the phone by my hospital bed. "Get me the police department," she said to the operator, her voice like ice, "and connect me to the elder abuse unit. I need to report a crime being committed against a patient currently in my care." "Yes, I'll hold." The fog had lifted. The truth was out. But as I lay there, listening to the quiet clicks of the phone line, I knew the storm that was about to break over my family was just beginning. The arrival of the police was a quiet, somber affair, devoid of the drama I might have imagined. 2 detectives from the elder abuse unit, a man and a woman in plain clothes, met with Ms. Davis in the hallway outside my room. Their faces were grim and professional. This was a story they had heard in different forms 100 times before. I watched them through the small window in my door, a strange detached observer of my own life's implosion. The full truth of what Michael and Jessica had done was still washing over me in sickening waves. The fog in my mind was receding, and with every inch of returning clarity, the pain of their betrayal grew sharper, more exquisitely agonizing. After a long conversation with Ms. Davis, during which she handed them my journal, the toxicology report, and the dentist's statement, the detectives walked down the hall to the family waiting room. I did not see what happened next, but Ms. Davis recounted it to me later. Michael and Jessica, who had been impatiently waiting, stood up with practiced expressions of concern the moment the detectives entered. "Officers, thank God you're here," Michael began, his voice dripping with false relief. "Our mother, she's had a complete breakdown. We've been trying to get her help." The female detective, a woman with tired, intelligent eyes, cut him off mid-sentence. "Mr. and Ms. Henderson," she said, her voice flat and devoid of sympathy. "We have a toxicology report from this hospital showing that your mother has been systematically drugged with a powerful cocktail of unprescribed antipsychotic and sedative medications." She held up a plastic evidence bag containing my journal. "And we have this, your mother's detailed account of a months-long campaign of psychological abuse. We have a lot of questions for you. We'd like you to come down to the station to answer them." The masks shattered. Jessica, the sharp paralegal, immediately went on the defensive, demanding a lawyer, her voice high and shrill with panic. Michael, less composed, simply crumbled, his face pale with the dawning catastrophic realization that the game was over. They were not treated as concerned family members. They were escorted out of the hospital waiting room by 2 uniformed officers, a quiet, humiliating procession that marked the end of their cruel charade. I remained in the hospital for 3 more days. The first day was spent in a detox haze as the doctors flushed the poison from my system. With each passing hour, my mind felt more like my own. It was like waking from a long, terrifying dream. Thoughts became clear and sharp again. Memories returned, solid and true, and with that clarity came the full, crushing weight of the truth. I lay in my hospital bed, and I wept. I wept not for myself, but for the children I had lost. The son I had taught to ride a bike, the daughter whose hair I had braided, how could they? How could the babies I had raised, the children I had loved with every fiber of my being, look me in the eye and slowly, methodically, try to destroy my mind for the sake of money? The rage I felt was a pure, white-hot thing, but beneath it was a chasm of grief so deep, I feared it would swallow me whole. Miss Davis was my anchor. She visited me every day, not just as a social worker, but as a compassionate witness to my pain. She arranged for a lawyer to represent my interests and a therapist for me to speak to. She was, in those first few days, the only person holding the shattered pieces of my life together. On the day I was to be discharged, the lead detective, a man named Miller, came to my room to speak with me one last time. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, his voice gentle but direct, "I want you to know that the case against your children is ironclad. Between their panicked and conflicting stories at the station, the medical evidence, and your journal, the DA is ready to file multiple felony charges. We're talking elder abuse, assault, poisoning. They are facing very, very serious prison time." He paused, his gaze steady and serious. "The final decision, however, rests with you. The DA will not proceed to a grand jury without your full cooperation. We need to know, are you prepared to press charges and testify in open court against your son and your daughter?" The question sucked the air from the room. It was the question I had been dreading, the one I had been pushing to the back of my newly cleared mind. Justice. That's what the world, what any sane person would demand. They had tried to destroy me. They had violated me in the most intimate and cruel way imaginable. They deserved to be punished. They deserved to be locked away. The rage in my heart screamed, yes, make them pay. But then I saw their faces. Not the faces of the greedy, cruel adults in the lawyer's office, but the faces of my children. Michael, at age 5, with a gap-toothed grin holding up a macaroni necklace he had made for me. Jessica at 8, her face a mask of fierce concentration as she learned to read. The ghosts of the children I had loved, the children I still loved in some broken, twisted way, rose up to haunt me. Could I be the one to send them to prison? Could I, their mother, be the one to cage them? The detective saw the war in my eyes. You don't have to decide right now, he said kindly. Take some time. Your lawyer will be in touch. That night, alone in the quiet, sterile safety of my hospital room, I looked out the window at the glittering lights of the city. The law was offering me justice. A clean, simple, and brutal solution to the horror my children had inflicted, but my heart, the foolish, stubborn, and irreparably broken heart of a mother, was whispering a different word. It was whispering a word I wasn't sure I was strong enough to say, mercy. And I had no idea which path in the end would be the one to destroy me more. I was discharged from the hospital into a world that felt both familiar and terrifyingly new. The fog was gone from my mind, but the landscape of my life was a wasteland. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene tainted by the memory of my children's betrayal. My family, the bedrock of my existence, was a source of profound pain and a looming impossible choice. Ms. Davis, my guardian angel in a sensible blazer, arranged for me to stay in a quiet, furnished apartment in a secure downtown building. You need a neutral space, Gabriella, she had said, a place to heal and to think, where you are in control. And so, in the sterile anonymity of that apartment, I confronted my decision. For days, I barely moved. I sat by the large window, watching a city I'd lived in my whole life but no longer felt a part of. And I wrestled with the ghosts of my past and the two terrifying futures that lay before me. I thought of Arthur. I thought of his quiet passion, of the secret, beautiful world he had built in his studio. The children were right about one thing. He had been selfish in his own way, prioritizing his collection over our family's comfort. But his selfishness was born of a deep, abiding love for art, for history, for beauty. Theirs was born of a cold, ugly greed. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that Arthur would want his legacy protected from that greed at all costs. That part was clear. Justice for Arthur. But what about justice for me? My rage was a righteous, burning fire. They had drugged me. They had violated the sacred trust between a mother and her children. They had tried to steal my mind, my freedom, and my future. The thought of them facing a judge, of being held accountable by the law, brought a grim, satisfying sense of order. They deserved punishment. They deserved prison. But every time I reached that conclusion, I would see their faces. Not the hard, calculating faces of the adults who had plotted against me, but the faces of the children I had raised. Michael, at 7, his face beaming with pride as he presented me with a lopsided, handmade birdhouse. Jessica, at 10, her brow furrowed in concentration as she read a book aloud to me, her small hand clutching mine. The ghosts of that love, that innocence, were a powerful, agonizing counterweight to my rage. After a week of this internal torment, I knew what I had to do. I called my lawyer. I asked him to arrange a meeting, not with the district attorney, but with Michael and Jessica. The meeting took place in the cold, impersonal conference room of his law firm. I sat at one end of a long, polished table with my lawyer and Miss Davis by my side. My children sat at the other end with their lawyer. They looked awful. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by a pale, haunted fear. They were two cornered animals waiting for the hunter to deliver the final blow. They would not look me in the eye. I let the silence stretch for a long moment, and then I spoke. My voice was calm, clear, and devoid of the hysterical grief they had tried so hard to manufacture in me. "I know what you did," I began, my gaze fixed on them. "I know about the gaslighting and the lies and the poison you put in my food. You did not just try to steal my money. You tried to steal my mind, myself. There is no crime more intimate, more cruel than that." I saw Jessica flinch, a tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. Michael just stared at the table, his jaw clenched. "The district attorney has a case that will send you both to prison for a very long time," I continued, "and the law and every person I've spoken to tells me that is what you deserve. That is justice." I saw the last bit of hope drain from their faces. Their lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I have spoken with the DA's office," I said. "I have told them that I will not be pressing charges. I will not testify against my own children in a court of law." A wave of stunned, incredulous relief washed over their faces. Michael looked up at me, his eyes wide. Their lawyer began to smile, sensing a victory, but I held up a hand. "Do not misunderstand me," I said, my voice turning to ice. "I am not doing this for you. I am not forgiving you. Forgiveness is a gift, and it is one you have not earned. I am doing this for me. I am doing this because I am your mother, and despite the monsters you have become, I cannot be the one who puts you in a cage. That is the burden I will carry. That is my mercy." I stood up, my own verdict, my own justice, ready to be delivered. But my mercy has a price. From this moment on, you are no longer a part of my life. You will not call me. You will not write to me. You will not try to see me. We are strangers. My lawyer will have a legally binding agreement drawn up to that effect. I took a deep breath, and I am having my will redrafted. Everything your father and I built, his entire collection, will be placed in a charitable foundation in his name, dedicated to supporting young, struggling artists in Detroit. You will not receive a single dollar. You made your choice. You wanted your father's money more than you wanted your mother's love. Now you have neither. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving them in a stunned, devastated silence. I didn't look back. I walked out of that conference room, out of that building, and into the bright, clear afternoon sun. I had lost my children, the greatest and most profound loss a mother can endure. But as I walked away, a strange, heartbreaking lightness filled my chest. The war was over. I had finally, after a lifetime of caring for others, found myself. Now, all that was left was to decide what to do with the life I had just reclaimed. The weeks that followed the confrontation in the lawyer's office were a study in quiet, painful reconstruction. The legal documents were signed, creating an impenetrable wall of silence between my children and me. The threat was gone, but a profound, aching void remained. I had chosen mercy, but mercy had left me utterly, completely alone. Grieving a husband was a natural, understandable sorrow. But grieving two living children, grieving the memory of the family I thought I had, was a complex, silent, and deeply lonely agony. My first act of my new life was to abandon the old one. I could not stay in the house. Every room, every corner, was now tainted by the memory of their betrayal. The kitchen where Jessica had served me poisoned casseroles, The living room where Michael had patronizingly explained my own forgetfulness to me, it was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. With the help of a realtor, I put it on the market, selling it quickly and without an ounce of sentiment. I was a refugee, and I was not looking back. While the sale was pending, I moved into the small furnished apartment Ms. Davis had found for me. It was in this quiet, anonymous space that I began the real work. Not just the work of healing, but the work of building. I had a $20 million legacy to honor, and the responsibility of it was both terrifying and the only thing keeping me from drowning in my grief. I started spending my days at Arthur's studio. At first it was painful, his presence so palpable in the scent of the oils and the clutter of his tools, but slowly the space transformed for me. It was no longer the dusty, neglected workshop of a humble restorer. It was the heart of a secret empire of beauty. With the help of Mr. Davies, I hired a professional art curator, a brilliant young woman from the Detroit Institute of Arts, to help me with the monumental task of cataloging the collection. Her name was Elena, and her reverence for the art was a balm to my soul. She would gasp with delight as we would unwrap a new painting from its protective covers, her eyes lighting up as she recognized the brushstrokes of a forgotten master or the raw, vital energy of an unknown genius. Through her eyes, I began to see the collection not just as Arthur's passion, but as a significant national treasure. "Your husband wasn't just a collector, Gabriella," she said to me one afternoon, as we stood before a breathtaking abstract painting that pulsed with color and life. He was a historian, a cultural preservationist. He saved works that the mainstream art world had forgotten or ignored. This collection, it tells a story. And in that moment, the mission of my new life became crystal clear. Arthur had spent his life saving these stories on canvas. I would spend the rest of my life making sure those stories were heard. The plan for the Arthur Henderson Art Foundation was born. It would not be a stuffy private collection for the wealthy elite. It would be a living, breathing institution dedicated to the very artists Arthur had championed. We would use the $20 million to create scholarships, to provide studio space for young, struggling artists in Detroit, and to build a public gallery where Arthur's collection could be seen for free by everyone. It would be a place of creation, of community, of hope. It was a way to transform my husband's quiet, solitary passion into a loud, joyful public gift. The work was all-consuming. I was learning about nonprofit law, about endowments, about gallery design. I, who had spent my life managing a small household budget, was now the chairwoman of a multi-million-dollar foundation. I was meeting with architects and art historians and city planners. The grief was still there, a constant low hum beneath the surface of my days, but now it had a counterpart, a thrilling, terrifying, and deeply meaningful sense of purpose. With the sale of the house finalized, I found a new place to live. I didn't want another quiet suburban house. I wanted a new life, a new view. I bought a beautiful, light-filled loft apartment in a renovated historic building downtown with huge windows that overlooked the bustling heart of the city's growing arts district. I filled it not with the ghosts of my past, but with the promises of my future. Books about art, comfortable furniture that was all my own, and on the main wall, I hung the first painting from Arthur's collection that I had ever truly seen. The one Elena and I had stood before, the one that pulsed with life. One afternoon, as I was unpacking the last of my boxes in my new home, a certified letter arrived. My heart seized for a moment, the old fear, a phantom limb. But it wasn't from my children. It was from a law firm representing a bank. It was a formal bankruptcy notice. Michael's contracting business, which had apparently been propped up for years by his expectation of a future inheritance, had finally collapsed. A week later, another letter, this one from the State Bar Association. Jessica had been disbarred for mishandling client funds. I read the letters and the news of their self-inflicted ruin, and I waited for the feeling of triumph, of righteous satisfaction, of karma. But it never came. All I felt was a quiet, profound, and heartbreaking sadness for the two broken people who had chosen money over their mother. I folded the letters and put them in a drawer. Their story was over. Mine and Arthur's was just beginning. The grand opening of the Arthur Henderson Art Foundation took place 1 year after my old life had officially ended. We had found the perfect space. A vast, forgotten warehouse in a revitalized industrial district, and transformed it into a world-class gallery and community arts center. The night of the launch, the cavernous space was filled with a joyful, eclectic crowd. Serious art critics from New York, local politicians, grizzled old artists from the neighborhood, and the bright, hopeful faces of the first class of students who had received scholarships from the foundation. I moved through the crowd, not as a grieving widow, but as the founder and chairwoman of this incredible new institution. I wore a simple, elegant gown the color of deep sapphire, and for the first time in my life I felt truly beautiful, my beauty radiating not from the cut of the cloth, but from the unshakable sense of purpose that now anchored my soul. I laughed with Ms. Davis, who was now a treasured friend and a member of the foundation's board. I spoke with Elena, my brilliant curator, about the incredible turnout. I spent a long time talking to a shy, prodigiously talented young painter from a rough part of the city, the first ever recipient of the Arthur Henderson Scholarship. His eyes shone with a gratitude so profound it almost brought me to tears. Later that evening, I stood on a small stage to give a speech. As I looked out at the sea of faces all turned toward me, a wave of nervous energy washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a calm, steady resolve. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and strong in the suddenly silent room. My late husband, Arthur Henderson, was a quiet man. To the world, and even to his family, he was a humble art restorer who loved his work. But he had a secret, passionate life. He was a guardian, a preserver. He spent his life quietly and diligently gathering and saving the works you see on these walls, the stories, the struggles, and the triumphs of a generation of artists who might otherwise have been forgotten. I spoke of his passion, of his love for beauty. I did not speak of his secrets or of the pain that had brought this foundation into being. I told the story I had chosen to tell, a story of a quiet man's beautiful legacy. The mission of the Arthur Henderson Art Foundation, I concluded, is to continue his work, not just to preserve the art of the past, but to nurture the art of the future. To ensure that every young person in this city who has a story to tell and a fire in their heart has the resources they need to create. For many years, I believed my own life was a small, quiet story. But my husband's legacy taught me that even in the most humble of lives, a great and beautiful purpose can be waiting. This foundation is not just his legacy, it is my new beginning. And I am so very grateful to share it with all of you. The applause was a warm, rolling wave. After I stepped down from the stage, I slipped away from the crowd for a moment, seeking a quiet corner. I stood before the magnificent, vibrant, abstract painting that hung in the place of honor in the main hall. It was the first painting I had truly seen in the studio, the one that had felt like Arthur's very soul on canvas. Standing before it now, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had not just protected his memory, I had given it a voice. I had transformed his quiet, solitary passion into a living, breathing gift to the world. A young woman, The scholarship recipient I had spoken to earlier approached me hesitantly. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, her voice full of awe, I just, I don't know how to thank you. My whole life, people told me that a girl from my neighborhood doesn't get to be an artist. You've changed my life." I looked at her bright, hopeful face, at the future that my husband's secret life was now making possible, and I felt a joy so pure it was almost a physical ache. I thought back to the woman in the hospital bed, a woman so broken she had lost faith in her own mind. I thought of the mother who had lost her children, a wound whose faint silvery scar I would carry on my heart forever. But it was no longer an open wound that defined me. It was simply a part of a much larger, more complex, and ultimately more beautiful canvas. My children had tried to take my husband's fortune, but in the end, I was the one who had inherited his true treasure, a life filled with purpose, and a legacy built not on the cold, hard value of money, but on the infinite, enduring power of beauty.